Hi, I just realized I was muted. Good evening, and thank you for coming out to this event, the second to last event in the Humanities Center at Texas Tech's fall schedule under our forest theme. I'm Dr. Michael Borshak. I am an associate professor of English in the Department of English at Texas Tech and the director of the Humanities Center at Texas Tech. Very grateful to have you with us here tonight. Tonight's event is entitled Tree Food, Forests, Indigenous American Cuisines, and Native Food Sovereignty. And before I turn things over to our host for the evening, who will introduce our special guests, I just want to say a few words about the Humanities Center. We have one more event coming up under the forest theme for fall, and that's next Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Also on Zoom, we will have Lee Klinger's lecture, Forest Restoration Theory and Practice based on Indigenous Cultural Tending. You can register for that event and for our spring events, which we'll be announcing soon, at our website, humanitycenter, all one word, .ttu.edu under the events tab. You can also follow us on social media. We have accounts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and we report all of our scheduled events on there. And on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, we also will post the registration links directly for all Zoom events. So I encourage you to follow us on those social media. Also, if you've not had a chance to listen to it yet, this fall, the Humanities Center at Texas Tech launched a new podcast entitled Humanities Now. And our very first episode in that series for September previewed the entire forest theme and featured conversations with all of the programmers for the forest theme. So I encourage you to have a listen to that to get a sense of the philosophical foundations for this year's theme and all of our programming. Also, this week in particular, I would encourage you to listen to our November episode, which is all about democracy and elections, and features 4 different Texas Tech faculty in the humanities contextualizing American democracy from very different disciplinary perspectives. You can find Humanities Now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and probably any other podcast directory, that you use. Before I turn things over to Sarah Spurgeon, as always, with all of our events, I want to read the Humanities Center's Land Acknowledgement Statement. The Humanities Center at Texas Tech opens its officially sponsored events with an acknowledgement of the Indigenous people on whose lands we host our talks and gatherings. The center opens its events with this gesture as part of our commitment to respecting the shared humanity of different populations across diverse cultural traditions, and to remembering with clarity the complex and violent truths of our history. With that in mind, we acknowledge the sacred grounds on which we stand, the traditional homelands of the Apache tribe of Oklahoma, the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes, the Comanche Nation, the Jicarilla Apache Nation, the Kiowa tribe of Oklahoma, and the Mescalero Apache tribe of the Mescalero Reservation. We pay respect to their elders past and present, and please take a moment tonight to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, trauma, migration, and settlement that brings us here together today. With that, I'd like to turn things over to our host for the evening, my colleague in the Department of English, Sarah Spurgeon.
Thanks, Michael. Welcome, everyone, to the Texas Tech Humanities Center event, Tree Food, Forests, Indigenous American Cuisines, and Native Food Sovereignty. I'm Sarah Spurgeon, professor in the Department of English, and I'll be one of your moderators this evening. Let me introduce our other moderator, Professor Vicki Sutton, member of the Lumbee tribe, distinguished Horn Professor at the Texas Tech School of Law, and a founding member of the National Congress of American Indians. Professor Sutton, would you like to say a few words?
Hi, thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you, Michael, for the land acknowledgement. I appreciate it. Yes, I am a member of the NCAI Policy Advisory Board. I can't take credit for founding the NCAI, but thank you very much, the Policy Advisory Board. Yes, I'm very happy to be here tonight, and trees are a very important part of my culture. The Lumbee tribe in eastern North Carolina where we have the pine woodlands that is part of the southern system and a home to a large number of endangered species. And we are called the people of the dark water. So it's a very wet, swampy pine area. So that is very much part of our culture. And the pine cone is actually symbolic of our tribe and part of our patchwork symbol on all of our regalia is the pine cone. So that is a very important part. Also, traditionally, from that area, the Sapani Okanichi, as well as the Lumbee, have traditional orchards with fruit trees. So we do get a lot of fruit. And in fact, my ancestor actually had one of these orchards, and we found evidence of that. But there are three main trees: apple trees, pawpaw trees, if you've ever heard of that one. And there's also the chestnut tree. And the chestnut tree was almost completely wiped out in the Southeast, but some of the indigenous people in North Carolina preserved some of them. And my family has 3 of them left. So that's how important they are to us, that we've been trying to protect those over the years. So this is really exciting for me to be a part of it. And I thank you for inviting me to be a part, Sarah and Michael, and welcome to Rachel and Carlos to Lubbock virtually. Thank you for being with us.
All right, thank you, Vicki. So if this is your first Zoom webinar event, let me just explain that you'll be able to see our presenters and the moderators, but audience members, you won't really be seeing yourselves, but don't worry, we know you are there and you'll all get the opportunity to ask questions of our speakers at the end of the evening. If you are inspired and have a question that comes up while the speakers are still talking, just use the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. You can type in your questions at any time and they will be kept in a queue until the end of the presentations. So now let me tell you a little about our presenters. We are so honored tonight to have 2 leading voices in the vibrant and expanding global movement for Indigenous food activism and education. M. Karlos Baca, Tewa, Diné, Nuuciu, is an Indigenous food activist who grew up on the Southern Ute Nation that's located in the high desert and mountains of what we now call Southern Colorado. He's the founder of Taste of Native Cuisine, which was created alongside the Southern Ute Cultural Center to promote traditional Indigenous foodways in the community, and has grown over the last decade to include work with tribal nations across the country. He is also the founder of Fourth World Farm, which is focused on pre-colonial foods and agriculture. Agricultural systems of the high desert region of the Southwest. And he's a co-founder of the Indigenous Food Activist group, the I Collective, which has representation of Indigenous knowledge keepers from 18 tribes from Oaxaca to First Nations, and uses Indigenous foodways as a medium to combat structural white supremacy and continued warfare against Indigenous people. He is also a writer, a sheep herder, and most importantly, a son, father, uncle, and grandfather. Karlos Baca, who will be our first speaker this evening then, is native to the pine, fir, and aspen forests of the San Juan Mountains in Southern Colorado. Our second speaker for this evening, chef and Indigenous food activist Rachel Sayet, calls the coastal forests of what is now known as New England as her home. Ms. Sayet is a member of the Mohegan Nation. She earned her master's degree from Harvard and works in the Mohegan Nation's cultural department, where she creates food sovereignty initiatives for the Mohegan tribe. Her most recent projects is the Native Foods Discussion Group, created to share knowledge about seasonal eating, harvesting, growing, and fishing practices, reflecting the very different indigenous cuisines that emerged from the very different forests of the coastal regions of North America, where, as in southern Colorado, one might eat corn, beans, and squash grown in cleared areas along with deer meat and other game, but also herring and clams, as well as hundreds of varieties of plants indigenous to the coastal forests of what is now called New England. So for every forest on this continent, indeed for every ecosystem, from desert to wetlands to prairies, there is an indigenous cuisine that reflects the stunning variety of gathered and hunted foods that abound there, woven into an indigenous epistemology that has traditionally been as deeply rooted as any tree, as widely branching as any river, a stunning living repository of knowledge about forests and the forest's inhabitants, human and non-human, trees and fungi, birds and plants, roots and animals, berries, nuts, and herbs. So while settler colonialism has cut down many of this continent's forests and attempted to eradicate many of its indigenous cultures to closely related enterprises, organizations like Taste of Native Cuisines and Native Foods Discussion Group work to preserve and revitalize both the forests and the indigenous foodways that grew from them. So let's begin our presentations for tree food, forests, indigenous American cuisines, and native food sovereignty with our first speaker, Karlos Baca. Welcome, Karlos.
Hey, how is everybody tonight? Hope everybody's doing good. Thank you for joining us. Guess I don't need to introduce myself since you already did that. The thing about the ecosystem of where I live is actually, I think the way that you characterize like the San Juans, which is, you know, pine, fir, spruce, and these things. If I drive 15 miles to the north, that's the case. Where I actually live, though, is pinon and juniper, which is an old growth pinon juniper forest. And I thought that I was really thinking about what forest foodways are, because it's what I grew up in. But I think I wanted to conversate from a different perspective, maybe not a different perspective, maybe it's a different direction. So here at Fourth World Farm lies in the Mancos Valley, what is known as the Mancos Valley, which is just underneath of our northern sacred mountain, which is the Beginsa. This valley was colonized by the Mormons, and this forest was practically clear cut. So this whole valley is just pretty much for hay production. And so 2 years ago when we started the farm, which sits on the oldest dairy here in the Southwest, this is our barn is like a over 100-year-old historical landmark, I guess you would say, if we went that direction. But so these acreages here just had cattle and livestock for all these years, and I don't know if you know what 100 years of livestock on the earth does. You know, you can look up here in our forests at like around Bears Ears and around all these other places where just with cattle being there for even half that time has destroyed entire ecosystems. So our journey here is to actually reforest this space, and to re-indigenize even more so. So that means a space that just a few years ago was completely dead. What we've begun to do is, from the mycorrhizal level all the way into the native tree species, we've begun to reintegrate the indigenous system of this space. And so the reason I speak on that is because I grew up in these mountains, and I personally use just over 300 plants, roots, berries, and whatnot, from these mountains. And so that's given me the ability to begin a re-indigenizing of the space using everything that's around me. Right, so I don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to go shopping for seeds or any of these things, right? I just harvest up here on the hillside and over there on the other side of the mountain, and collect mushrooms and create spore to introduce into the soil here, right? So the forest ecosystem is a much deeper conversation and relationship than most people see, right? I think about how many of my plant relatives here in the San Juan Mountains, let's say my grandfather taught me about, or others have taught me about, that have their own name, and they have their own cosmology. They have their own songs. They have been woven, or I should say, we have been woven into their system. And it's a very different outlook than your Western academic viewpoint, right? It's coming from a very different angle when you are actually part of the system as opposed to standing outside of it. So to talk to the indigenous foods and our food ways, so like I mentioned, I use over 300 plants in this Four Corners region, and even more so because I start my foraging and gathering in February down in the middle of the Sonoran, and I just kind of work my way up from there throughout the year. Luckily to have beautiful mentors and others like Twyla Castador from San Carlos Apache, who anybody that's watched Gather, and if you haven't watched Gather, get out there and watch it. I've been introduced to her, and I get to this really beautiful realization that if I look at that territory in the Sonoran, right, there's this other forest. There's the forest there just happens to be saguaros and cacti and things, right? And it's one of the most fruit abundant and rich places I've ever had the honor to go and harvest in. So what's to know about indigenous foodways in the mountains, right? And the revitalization is everything. I don't really know how to verbalize or put in the words really the way that us as Indigenous people relate, and how we relate to these forests and these places that are places of food, places of shelter, places of transportation. Even here, even being a mountain people here in the Southwest and being in the high desert, the Ute people also were water people and built canoes and traveled the waterways here. And there's a lot of little known history, but I'm gonna share a story really quick about some work I was doing with the University of Utah a couple of years ago about what they call Solanum jamesii, which is the wild potato here in the Southwest. It's the only potato known to be indigenous to the Northern Hemisphere. And we were up in the Bears Ears region. We have the Bears Ears summer gathering there, and I do typically foraging classes with youth there. And we have a pretty heavy drought, right? We're in our 21st year of drought here, and all predictions point to us being in the beginning of another mega drought cycle here in the Southwest, which means if you know anything about the history of the indigenous folks of this region, they've come and gone and moved with the water, because this environment is very harsh, and it does have cycles of drought. But 3 years ago, I think I didn't even plant food that year. That's how bad it was. I just was up in the mountains and noticed that the juniper berries were blooming in the dead of winter, and that was probably a bad idea. But in this journey up there, I went to go scout, right? And I'm figure I should know what I'm getting into with a bunch of kids behind me and things like this. So I take a walk up this valley, and there's not much. There's no water. There's nothing really going. There's a lot of plant relatives that I know, but nothing is bloomed. Nothing. The pinon trees have aborted their cones. The what we call chilchin or is three-leaf sumac was the only thing that was really in my view. And so in my process, I was really trying to understand, like, what am I going to teach these kids other than about what's happening with our climate. Really, that's kind of where I was at. But I climbed up to the ridge of this canyon, and I just started following it down, trying to see if what I could find. And I got to this bend, and I walk around the corner, and there's some ancestral dwellings, and I apologize. In our culture, we don't really go into those spaces. It's not for us. We acknowledge that our ancestors still dwell in those, and so I started to walk away, and almost I feel like I had a physical tug pull me backwards, and I had to really recognize that one, there was something that I was missing, and two, I came to the recognition that I had come into a space I wasn't supposed to be in, and I didn't say thank you or leave an offering or anything. And so I poured my water out at the threshold of the door to the home. I said thank you, for we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for your guys' sacrifices and your information. And And at that point, when I turned around, I came to this, I kind of just walked towards the edge there, and I realized that I was standing in a food forest. and it was the first time that I had really such a vast understanding, because us, we speak to like indigenous agricultural systems. So I'm here at a farm and I'm creating this whole ecosystem, right? That's not just like corn, beans, and squash. It's trees and mushrooms and forbs and grasses and all of these things. And it's the same thing kind of replicating off of what I learned standing in that space and in what I learned growing up. So to speak to the depth of that, right? That I'm standing in this valley in the desert where you have to tread sand to get anywhere. Yet there's an entire food system that's been cultivated. And much like we do with what we call namasi, which is the four corners potato, they call it the four corners wild potato. Much like we do with nabi, which is a bare root, and in English is called osha. Which we do with a lot of our foods and our medicines, is that we move with them and they move with us. So you could say that you people were farmers, just in a different aspect, right? There wasn't a sedentary farming practice. It was a farming practice in motion that went all the way up as far as Idaho, Wyoming, and all the way down into the northern pueblos, New Mexico. And that's on the other side of the mountains, which is where the southern Ute, the Pino, the Moach, and the Capote people, these are traditional homelands, is over in the San Luis Valley, and then up through like the Denver region. On this side, the Ute Mountain and the northern Ute, that's their grounds are like that as far down as Hopi. And each one of these spaces has entirely cultivated food forests. There's a really deep level of understanding of motion when you are in place, or when you're in relationship with the space you live in. And I'll give the example of the four corners potato, which is the way that I was taught. Was it's not something you harvest in the fall. It's something you harvest with the spring onion. And so when your spring onions pop is when you harvest this particular potato. And to be doing that, you have to be in motion. You have to know where these things have been planted, right? Where you're going to be that time next year, and all of these things. And so I do that here locally. I grow seed here on the farm, and I move the potatoes all over the mountains. The same with different roots and medicines. And so what are mountain indigenous foodways? What are forest foodways? You know, it's a really
I think we may have lost Carlos for a moment. Let's see if we can get him back.
Oh no. So you guys froze up, and then I was like, well, is that me? Is that them? What was the last thing you heard?
What are forest foodways?
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, so I mean, what are indigenous forest foodways? You know, you have to, like the science, there's always the conversation and joke in Indian country that we're always happy that science catches up to indigenous knowledge on a regular basis. And if you look at current Western science findings of what the Amazon is, that it's an entirely created ecosystem, right? If you look at the fact that there's botanical gardens all over the world, but there's no acknowledgement really that they were exported from the Aztec Empire to Europe and spread from there. You know, this, so what I was saying before when I disappeared there was that I think it's time to really acknowledge traditional ecological knowledge of the indigenous people, right? And what it means to decolonize and what it means to re-indigenize. Because we can look around right now and see that the Western way doesn't work. We can look around and I'm very fond of saying that nobody was hungry before capitalism. and we're in a space right now that I think there's this huge opportunity where in the midst of this election cycle, in the midst of COVID, in the midst of all this space, that people are beginning to see the fragility of our food systems, of the Western food system. And within indigenous communities, that recognition intertwined with the indigenous food sovereignty movement has really been an amazing catalyst for what it means to embrace and bring back our foodways, and whether that's the movement of food in the mountainous forest ecosystem or that's planting a garden. I think that we have a beautiful opportunity to I guess come to maybe a mutual understanding of what we need to do to move forward, and what it looks like to actually take care of a place instead of deplete a place. Here on this sacred mountain that sits up above my home, if you're looking from any direction, you can see the clear cut that they have there. And when you go up there, it's just like this decimated ecosystems that have been this cultivated thing in this cultivated space for tens of thousands of years. It's a place where indigenous folks in this region have go to pray and continue to go to pray for countless generations. We go to go to collect medicines. We go to collect foods, right? And there's always these scars across the forest to remind us of what colonization is, right? And I think that little reflections like that are where we need to recognize, like, that this, like, how symbolic, right? something like that is. That we have such little care for this place that we're willing to just go destroy miles worth of ecosystem for what? Right? These are, they're not like, this isn't like new conversation, right? This is pretty standard thing, but I think that we can't really have discussions on foodways when Western people don't really have any idea of what that means, I don't think. I think the way that I typically describe colonization and the effects of heteropatriarchal society in general is that when I talk to Indigenous people in particular, I say, imagine that we killed off all of our medicine people. Imagine that we dug up all of our roots and we left them on a shore and we sailed to a new place. And we've been there for 528 years with still no understanding of what it means to be rooted. Right? And so in those ways, it's not hard to see why it's so easy for the constant destruction of our forest and the constant destruction of our ecosystems in general, no matter what extractive industry that is. And so when I think about our indigenous foodways, and whether that be the saguaro cactus forest or old growth pinon juniper, or whether I'm up at 11,000 feet harvesting mushrooms, you know, it's all a conversation of how do we stop the never-ending warfare against indigenous food systems. You know, we can sit here and talk, and I can sit here and tell you about food. We can talk about pinon and the importance of and acorns and the importance of and how those weave in and out of our cosmology. But it doesn't really have any bearing if we're not having any conversation about the depths of destruction and the depths of just I don't even know, just the wanton wholesale depletion of this place, you know? And so that's what I have to offer y'all. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Carlos. That was really fascinating. So audience, I'll remind you all again that you can type questions into the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen at any time, and they'll just be saved there until our second speaker for the evening, Rachel Sayet, has finished her presentation. So welcome, Rachel.
Kwai, greetings. So I'm Rachel Sayet. I come to you from the Mohegan Nation. My Mohegan name is Akirusu, which means she who reads. I'm the daughter of the Mohegan medicine woman, and my great aunt was Gladys Tantaquidgeon, who was a medicine woman as well, who passed away in 2005 at the age of 106. I currently work for my tribe's museum, which is the oldest Native museum in the country, as a curator. And this museum was founded by Gladys, my great aunt. So on a daily basis, you know, I like what Carlos is saying, there's a lot of concepts and things that we deal with as Native people. I work with spiritual objects on a daily basis, as well as foods. So it's all connected. It's all connected to our culture and our spirituality, and those things aren't really separate. You know, we give back when we take something from the earth. You know, it's a common thing people say, you know, we give tobacco when we kill a deer, things like that. Throughout the country, we all have different practices, but there are similar practices with similar medicines like tobacco and sage and sweetgrass that a lot of us as Native people use for medicine. So today what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a little bit of a cooking demo, and I'm gonna kind of talk a little bit about the culture and the work I do as we're doing it. It's a little new way of doing it, but we're gonna do the best we can on Zoom. We have here, I have some Mohegan flint corn. So this is an 8-row variety. Our neighbors, the Narragansett, it's pretty much the same variety of corn. Pretty much every Mohegan is also Narragansett. Uncas is our great chief in the time of colonialism, who actually his grandfather was Narragansett. But I just found out I actually am also descended from a Narragansett chief Ninigret. So I'm now knowing that I'm double Narragansett, and every Mohegan is also. So very close relations between those two tribes. And again, the same variety of corn, the white flint corn. So what's a really common food in New England is the Johnny cake. And decided to make some of those today. It's not necessarily a tree food, but we'll have some maple syrup on it, which is a tree food. And then we'll have some cranberries, which come from the bogs, you know, and the swamps. So we'll put those in it. And a little hot. A lot of the work that I do at Mohegan, as you mentioned, Sarah, with the Native Food Discussion Group is, so that's a group that's specifically for Mohegan tribal members. I've been running since 2017. And what I do is I work with elders, mostly elders, but we have a few young people involved, and now we're getting more and more people involved. And a lot of times we just sit and talk about food. Sometimes we go somewhere. Sometimes for our tribe, we've lost a lot of land. We've lost, we were hit very early with colonialism. And so, although we do keep cooking some traditional foods, I wasn't brought up foraging. These are things I'm just starting to learn and things like that. So much of our land has been taken from us and even sold by us as part of our history, as being a tribe that actually sided with the colonists, that, you know, there's a complicated history there. And so for the Native Food Group, what we do is we talk about the foods. We specifically talk about the foods of the season, and we try to do something each season. I'm creating a 13-moon calendar just for food. And so, for instance, we're in the cranberry moon right now, and you know, we're kind of, you know, all these foods, they move for the cycles and the weather changes, and now with, you know, the weather changing and things like that, sometimes, you know, maple season might be a little earlier, sometimes cranberry season falls a little later. It all depends on the year and the temperatures and things like that. So right now we're still in the cranberry season. Cranberry bogs aren't super close to where I am. It's probably closest one about 40 minutes, but it's still fairly close. We still have them in Connecticut. Massachusetts has quite a few more cranberry bogs than we do. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. I am going to try to keep my eye on the time because I know we're already over. So this is a Johnny cake meal. This is specifically made from the white flint corn. This is actually quite a popular product that's sold in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and it's the traditional flint cornmeal. And throughout the country, I've been doing this work for a while now, 7 years since I started writing on this topic, and now, you know, 4 years since I've really been doing the groundwork with my tribe. But I've noticed a lot of things traveling to different Indigenous food conferences, like the Native Nutrition Conference out in Minnesota. And, you know, when I was there, they're serving Johnny cakes. They're not Johnny cakes, but they're calling them Johnny cakes. So, so it's one of those foods that's become, you know, an American food, but it's traditionally just the flint cornmeal and water. It doesn't have any extra ingredients. You know, like the ones I had in Minnesota, I think they were this thick, and there was bacon, and I don't even know. It was a lot of stuff in them. They tasted good, but it was not what I would call a Johnny cake. So show you here, this is the ones that I made. We're gonna try to make a couple more. I put fresh cranberries in half of these. Some of these I use the craisin, which is a dry. Honestly, you can see like it's not even as nice of a color. But you know, it's whatever you have. I figured I would just kind of demo with both. And you know, fresh is always great when you have it. You know, we as Indigenous people, and even now with everything that's going on, you know, it's always important to dry foods and have extra stock for the winter time. So I've got this last batch I'm gonna kind of put together here. So we've got the cornmeal. There's a cup of cornmeal here. And you want to add like hot boiling water to it, and you add it slowly so that it, I've got 2 spoons in there. You want to add it slowly because they get a weird consistency. So you just kind of add a little bit at a time, see if it looks good. See if it works. Yeah, and you can see I have the fresh cranberries in there, which again, these are not harvested by me, but I have seen Native people in mass, and I've tried them harvest cranberries, and they are a completely different flavor. If you've never tried wild cranberries, a lot of, just like a lot of stuff Karlos was talking about, it's a different flavor. Wild plants, they have to struggle and they go through a lot, and a lot of times they have a unique flavor, and the wild cranberries are sweeter. They're just more flavorful. So that's what happened. I gotta add a little bit more cornmeal. A little bit loose. And that's the thing too, like all these things, like indigenous recipes, they're not like so strict with like the cups and everything. I mean, it's just like a lot of us as home cooks too, you don't have to be so precise. You just want to get it. Some people might like it more thick, like just now it came out a little bit runny, but like some people might prefer it, one way. Other people prefer it the other way. It's not a one size fits all. And it, again, what I was thinking earlier when I was making this too is, in times of like now with the pandemic and when there's shortages, you're going to want to add more water because you're limited on cornmeal. I found out just now, or this couple of days, I'm going to look for this. And I was told that there was a cornmeal shortage. Not specifically an indigenous cornmeal shortage, but I was told that in Connecticut, supermarkets were out of cornmeal of all things. So it was kind of like, oh wow, another item, and it's like us as indigenous people doing this work, bringing back these ingredients, it just makes it even more important, just, okay, now there's a cornmeal shortage and we're over here with, saving corn and things like that. So it's extremely vital for not only indigenous folks, but others for our survival as people, as human beings. So we're gonna spray some of this. I grabbed this Smart Balance spray because it was the closest thing to sunflower oil. It has a little sunflower oil in it, and that's, an indigenous ingredient. Throw a few more of these in here, why not? We cut them in half earlier, but now we're just gonna go, why not whole? And this is something, so Johnny cakes are what, and again, everything is going to have an indigenous word or Mohegan word, and Narragansett word traditionally. However, honestly, don't know the word for Johnny cake, but the English meaning, it comes from journey cake. So, these were things that we would take on a long journey and still do sometimes. And that's why it's kind of become such a popular food, it's shelf stable. Nowadays, even some indigenous chefs add milk, or they'll add other ingredients. it's really, again, personal preference, what you want to do. You want to keep it strictly traditional. You want to keep it, you want to make it a little more modern. Sherry Pocknett, who's a close friend and Indigenous chef that I work with, she makes a modern day corn cake, and she utilizes milk and chives and a lot of black pepper. So that's like her recipe that she likes to use. At Plymouth Plantation, they go with the strict Shawnee cake recipe to teach the public, about what they're doing. A lot of the work that I'm doing at Mohegan, so we just got a huge grant for seed saving, and I worked on it in May, and it was a lot of the work that I've done with the Native Food Discussion Group helped to get the grant. And so now at the museum where I work, there's potential for more Indigenous food demos and things like that. During the pandemic, it's always going to be hard because there's a lot of restrictions for how many people can be part of all these things. But I'm excited that after years of really working on this as, not someone who's part of tribal council, not someone who's part of leadership, who's really just worked on this Native Food Discussion Group from the ground up, that it's getting some support. Because we've really just been going at this, myself and a bunch of elders, one of whom passed a couple years ago, and she is one of the major sources of knowledge on Indigenous food at Mohegan. Her name was Faith Davison. And, just so blessed to have had her as part of the group and worked on all these projects with all these amazing elders. Some of them are garden experts, some of them are herbalists. They all have a piece of the puzzle to share. And with a tribe like mine that has so much history of colonization, we need all those pieces together in a room to be able to put together, our Indigenous foodways, to be able to really bring them back. Things like Donny cake, we still make, but there's a lot of things that we don't, like acorn flour. So speaking of the trees, that's something that, a lot of tribes throughout the country would use. We didn't have gluten, we didn't have, dairy and all these things. And we didn't have yeast. So we made a lot of breads with different nuts, acorns and walnuts and things like that. So, another thing that I would like to, I haven't actually personally made it yet, but it's something that I would like to do. You could even make something like this, a flat, I know some of the other folks in the collective, like Brian Yazzie, does a cookie with the acorn flour, which I actually got to taste once, which was delicious. So, there's various things that you can do. I'm trying to make sure the temperature, now it's been going for a while, if the temperature gets a little weird, I turned it up and down, but that's okay. We can let them go. They're kind of a slow thing anyway. So while that's going, I made, wasn't super complicated, but while he was talking, I cooked some mushrooms. These are chicken of the woods. A friend of mine just foraged these for me and gifted them to me. So I figured I would just throw them in to the talk while we were doing this. So, again, as Karlos was speaking about fungi and all of these other things in the woodlands being super important. I personally am just starting to learn mushrooms being something that you really want to be an expert. You really want to learn that with a skilled forager. So it's something that I'm hoping to go with my friend and look into a little bit more as I continue this process. So we've got just regular cranberries here. And then we have, my friend was putting some of these pieces in the Johnny cakes earlier, thinking that was an interesting. So Tonka bars are a product made by some Lakotas and Pine Ridge. And it's a nice product because it's Indigenous made. So you can throw them in different things. These ones are the Tonka pieces. They're bison and cranberry, bison and orange, depending. It's good to support Native companies. There's a lot of big corporations that have really clobbered Tonka. And I myself, because I've been buying them for so long, have noticed it very seriously at organic supermarkets because I do shop at co-ops and Whole Foods. So I've been trying to get them when I can. And so you can throw them in things like Johnny cakes. You can throw them in like a wild rice. You can throw them in anything. They're just little chunks of bison. You can do, you could do anything with a Johnny cake. You can, traditionally we would also we dry strawberries and we grind those into powder to add to Johnny cakes and other breads like an acorn bread and things like that. A lot of what I've done in some demos has been just a regular cornbread with strawberries, which is a recipe that has been passed down to me from one of my mentors. And Narragansetts have been making a strawberry cornbread of some sort for a while, and it's recorded by Roger Williams that he had tried it, and they quote him as saying, Narragansetts make a very nice strawberry bread. Now, I don't know, again, I'm assuming that that bread is a Johnny cake with strawberry in it, not an actually strawberry cornbread. But again, they're all part of the process. The strawberry cornbread I make is one with flour and with maple sugar, and a lot of indigenous ingredients, but I do add regular flour as well as corn flour to get it to be a risen cornbread. But I don't know specifically what he was eating, but I really don't think it was that. I think it was most likely this and with the strawberry powder. So that's another thing I, have to try out is that strawberry powder recipe. So as we continue to do this project with the seed saving, it's nice because it becomes actually a help for me in this work, because now my coworkers are being told they have to go look for recipes and they have to go get this information, and it's a little bit less pressure on me, which is nice. In terms of this maple syrup, this is getting hot, everything over here. So this one, it's not a New England one. This one is from an Anishinaabe food, I don't know, I guess we call it food provider, food seller. We can take a picture of this maybe later to share, because I'm not that good at pronouncing the name. Zibamin Wong. I feel like I butchered it, but regardless, because it's not my tribe, but it's an indigenous company that sells maple. So they sell maple syrup and they sell maple sugar. And we also have Passamaquoddy, which is more local to me, that sells it. So I buy a lot of my stuff from Passamaquoddy maple as well. They also have sugar, syrup. Really important to support all of these companies right now in these times, because they're small and they need the support. So what we do is, we put the maple syrup on top of the Johnny cakes, just like, a lot of these things from New England, I don't know too much about the history of pancakes specifically. I know more about strawberry bread, strawberry shortcake, because it's something I've extensively studied. So say an example of that, but pancakes too, it's like these things evolve, you know what I mean? Johnny cakes, pancakes. You look at strawberry bread. I recently read an article last year, said strawberry shortcake came from strawberry bread. I should have made that connection myself, but until I actually read it on a paper, I said, oh yeah, it's just another food that was based off an indigenous food, because just like Indian pudding, where we're using, we were making things with cornmeal, like corn mush. The colonists added molasses to that. They added other ingredients. So a lot of these things really do have indigenous roots. And that was kind of how I started my work, was just doing research, talking to indigenous chefs and writing a paper. And later started the food group, being inspired by folks like, all the native chefs, like Karlos, all these different people that I had met at conferences in various places. I said, it's not enough to just write a paper and talk about the paper. I really need to get my tribe on the same page to move forward, because we as a tribe, as much as we have a successful casino and we have successful modern day businesses like that, we still have major health issues, just like every other tribe in the country. High rates of obesity, high rates of heart disease. It's not that it's the fact that we have a successful modern day business does not take that away. It's from historical trauma. It's from the fact that our people were eating, as we mentioned at the beginning, thousands of different types of plants, all these wild game, all this, in my area, shellfish, tons of shellfish. We had my original paper being called, Celebration of Land and Sea, Modern Indigenous Cuisine in New England, because we have this bounty here. We are so lucky to have this bounty. I think about deserts sometimes. I think, oh my goodness, like they had to do so much. Granted, they had the systems in place, but we really were lucky. We had the ocean right here. We have, the woods. We have all this food at our disposal. So, a lot of things don't need a lot of seasoning. These indigenous foods, like people know, like shellfish, scallops, oysters, you don't really need to season those things. Same thing as like something like a Johnny cake. So the recipe here on the bag, for instance, says to add sugar and salt. I chose not to, keep it strictly traditional. We didn't use those ingredients. There are tribes who harvested salt. My tribe wasn't one of them. So we really, our seasonings, you know, to get back to like tree food and different things, our seasonings were nuts and berries mostly, and some herbs, but a lot of our herbs are pretty bitter. So it was mostly like you're using the maple and you're using the berries, using the nuts, using these things actually to flavor things. And we were lucky, and we are lucky, that we live in this bountiful region. As much as now, again, we don't have much land, and we have limited access to, you know, our traditional fishing grounds, hunting grounds, all of those things, which is all part of the process to try to reclaim these things. But it's going to take a long time, especially in a place like where I live, where it's 400 years of colonization. So every day, you know, small goals and working towards them. So, you know, I'm trying to see if there's one that's done, because this one's at least hot. The other ones are a little cold at this point, but it's pretty close. I want to make sure we wrap up soon. This one's good. But yeah, going back to the maple. So, you know, and it's such an important Indigenous food, the maple. I talk about how, you know, you think about the dead of winter, and you think about, you know, really having nothing but those dried foods and the limited game, whatever you can get for a game at that time. And, you know, and then you have like that first food of the spring or late winter, right? It's that maple. It's like, it must have been so exciting back then, right? For our people, for all different tribes who have maple trees, to really like get to tap that tree and have that nutritious and sweet kind of flavoring to add to things. Obviously, it's a process cooking down the maple, even more of a process cooking it down into sugar. The sugar is more shelf stable. So I think that's why we as Indigenous people really relied on the sugar a lot. That's what kind of I've come to the conclusion, is just because it is so much more shelf stable. Granted, we had both. There's even a recipe that I have, I think it's in this book. There's a recipe for sure in this book called about maple beer, which is an oddity because it's definitely not traditional, but there's also a recipe, I think it's in the same book. This is my one of my mentors, Dale Carson. She is an elder now, and she is an Abenaki woman who wrote this book, Native New England Cooking, and other books, and just an amazing, you know, she did all this way before the Indigenous food movement. She was more of like a, you know, living history educator kind of thing. But in that, you know, in her work, she wrote cookbooks and just incredible knowledge base. And so there's a maple drink in here too, where you actually add water to make it into a drink after it's a syrup. So it's pretty interesting, because I think to myself, would we really have done that? We already had to cook it down. I think it's a more modern recipe, but it's a cool, I mean, maybe we would have on a special occasion, you know what I mean? Like let's make maple drink, you know, as a nice tonic, you know, on a day that, you know, might have excess maple or something. You know, it's hard to know for sure. I'm not sure exactly where she got that recipe, but it's a pretty tasty one. Just like having it as, you know, people add it for so many things. So it's just like maple syrup and water. I'm gonna add this can, a couple of them at least. Leave the rest on there. It's not a problem. I'm gonna take the maple. I know it's like an apartment kitchen here, limited space, but doing the best I can. So we've got that. We've got the maple. Oh, here we go. Even more pretty. Throw these. There you go. Throw those on top and let them roll off the table. But yeah, you know, super simple. You know, again, you can cocktail it. You can cater it as you like. If you want it to be sweeter, add the sugar inside, you know, and the salt. If you need the saltiness, I don't think it needs it. It's pretty tasty on its own with just a little bit of maple. A lot of tribes make different fruit sauces. Some tribes call that wajapi and, you know, things like that. So those can go on this too. Some type of fruit compote. You know, Red Lake Nation makes jams that I use for a lot of different things from out in Minnesota. So I promote their products and I'll use some of their products and, you know, on different pancakes and things sometimes. There's a lot of good native companies out there where you can get things if you don't want to make them from scratch. But look at this. This is really cool. I can burn myself, but you can see that whole cranberry there. See that? Pretty neat. So yeah, so I want to make sure that we don't, you know, go too far. So I know we both kind of went over, and I guess we can just take questions.
Wow. Well, thank you, Rachel. That was both interesting and delicious looking. Now we're all just sitting here drooling and watching you eat those great journey cakes with fresh cranberries and maple and oh my goodness. All right. Well, yes, now we can open up the virtual floor to questions, which I see we have a bunch already in the chat. So I will just open those off and start reading them off so that people can hear all of this. So the first question says, assuming that indigenous seeds grow popular and grow into food forests, how long would it take before whole communities people are relying less on groceries, et cetera, and more on indigenous seed collectives and community-run food forests? Either of you, Rachel or Carlos, could take that question. But Rachel, you are muted.
I'm pointing to Carlos.
I got you. Yeah, and I mean, I think that, you know, it's like what I said about nobody was hungry before capitalism, right? We operate in a circular economy. And so even though a lot of the chefs in the indigenous food movement have really embraced the capitalist endeavor, a lot of the native food practitioners here in the Southwest are really we're really working on going back to circular economy and really just stepping out of those ways and more back into the trade routes and more into shared seed, and I'm growing this and we're growing that. How do we get that to do it? And I think much like I was saying earlier, these times we're living in have really brought that to the forefront, that people have more of a need to do that. And because so many more people put out crops this year, I mean, they're just, I don't know how many, I think between the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network and the Bears Ears Coalition and just small indigenous farmers and producers, we're running out of seeds this year, you know, and there's farmers going back to their roots locally, just planting fields that haven't been planted in 50, 60 years plus. And so it can happen really quickly, but it depends on the community engagement, I guess, and land base, right? Indigenous, we're not all the same, right? I always say that we have one blessing that we have in the Southwest and in the high desert and the low desert is that colonizers were like, they considered it hell, and they didn't want anything to do with this place until they found coal and gas and uranium and things like this, right? So language and ceremony and cosmology and land base are really intact in a lot of ways. Whereas all our brothers and sisters from the East Coast that got moved to Oklahoma don't have that, you know. But there's been a lot of crossover, like cross sharing. Like I know the Pawnee have the Pawnee Sea Preservation project. Even though they're based in Oklahoma, they're working with a group in Nebraska in their traditional homelands. And have been able to bring back a lot of their ancestral seeds. So, you know, it's just a matter of availability, I guess, you know.
Great. That actually sort of leads into the next question that's on the Q&A, which is, do either of the panelists know about Blackfoot Nation seeds, plants, trees, or resources for the Blackfoot Nation forests, seeds, etc.?
I do not.
Well, something that it's something that the audience members can research maybe. Next question. Can you tell us how you use willows?
I can talk about just the way I've used it. I use it, well, people use it in herbal medicine, and people use it also in ceremony, as far as I know. So those are the two ways that I know, and it depends, I guess, on the willow, but red willow is like a natural Tylenol. It's in a lot of herbal creams and ingredients, things like that. And then you can also smoke the red willow bark as a ceremonial tool. But Karlos might have more to talk about it. I'm not sure.
I like just willow tea. Just came across it a lot of years ago. It was just kind of an accidental thing where we harvested willow to build sweat, to build a sweat lodge, and we ended up getting into some other stuff, and so we had everything in buckets overnight, in just buckets of water. And when we took them out, like that water smelled so beautiful that it began some. This is like 15 years ago or something, and now it's one of my favorite drinks. But I think the one thing I did with willow when we were kids was we'd strip the bark and string grasshoppers onto them and roast them over the fire, and that adds a really, really great flavor to the grasshoppers.
I always wanted to try grasshoppers, so thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say too, yeah, I've been wanting to, did you use the bark for the tea, or did you use leaves, or was it bark?
It was the whole willow, just soaking in water. So you could just cut a piece of the willow and just throw it in a gallon of water. It would do its thing.
I am so upset that we are not in one room with a huge kitchen and both of you making food. It's killing me. Next question. This one says it's for Karlos. In what ways does the built environment help with the processes of caretaking and stewardship of food cultivation? How does your movement and the harvesting cycles impact your needs from the built environment, like homes, dwellings, storage space, drying sheds, etc.?
I guess I haven't had the opportunity to live in an unbuilt environment to really have like a full answer to that. I can say like within, living in a modern dwelling, right, is a lot different circumstance. Where like underneath of our house, we have probably like a 5-foot space between the floor and the basement ground, and it's where we keep seeds. We have we're gonna be hanging up winter squash and winter melons and all those things here shortly. So I'm not sure. I'm not really sure how to answer that. But Summer, if you want to talk more about it, you can find me on all the social media. Maybe you could understand that or explain it to me a little more what you're asking.
All right, next one is for Rachel. Are there Indigenous food stores in New England that carry typical ingredients? Can we get a list of them? Maybe that's on Rachel's webpage.
No, actually, there are not, I wouldn't say Indigenous food stores. We have, Kentucky Pequot Museum sells some, like, they'll sell stuff from other tribes, like Red Lake Nation products, and Winona LaDuke's like Native Harvest. They have some of their products, but they also actually at Mashantucket, they actually do have a maple farm. I'm not sure how much they produce. I haven't personally tried it. I do know the guy who works on the farm, but I haven't, I don't know the level of production of their maple farm. But it is there. So you could look into that Mashantucket Pequot maple. There's been quite a few, not failed projects, but tribes that have tried to do the oystering route and it hasn't worked out for whatever reasons with politics and things that happen in tribes. So, like for a time, my tribe was doing that, like oystering as part of our, economic sustainability, but it didn't go too far. And there's a couple other tribes like Wampanoag, who I know were working on it at one point as well. But yeah, I would say at the Mashantucket Museum, they have a gift shop there. And then Tamaquag Museum, they have a gift shop, but they don't have food. Tamaquag is the Narragansett Museum. Where I work at the Tantaquidgeon Museum, we don't have a gift shop right now. We're very small staff. I do think that it would be good for these things to circulate more. A really important food for my people, which I have here, is called yokeg. And it's a parched ground cornmeal. And I think that is something that could be packaged, but it has a spiritual significance. So, elders are hesitant to want to package something like that. And at this stage, we don't really have enough corn growing to really even produce the level. So that's not going to happen anytime in the near future, but it is something that I've thought about for ways to get people to motivated about Indigenous food that could also sustain our economy, to get them thinking about, these things that people enjoy eating. The yokeg, but yeah, it's just, you can see how it's got little chunks in it because it's a cooked corn powder. It's not just straight cornmeal. Some people add it into the Johnny cakes. I haven't tried that yet. I always use my yolk sparingly because I don't have to always make more. And I do a lot of demos with it and eat it. It's another traveling food like Johnny cakes. So you can just kind of eat it as you're walking around, things like that. But yeah, I've been working on a Native Producers Guide with a woman named Buffy Turner, who runs a page for Native people, mostly the page on Facebook. And then the iCollective had shared another link to a producer's guide of lists of Native producers that had been created, I think, prior. So there's been some different projects going on that are trying to get to the point where we can have a full list of all the different Native producers. So I think there's even the NCAI, actually. Vicki, you may know this already because I got an email. And I said, wait a minute, we're working on this, and NCAI is also. So I think there's like 3 or 4 different producers guides going around where people are cobbling together all the Native companies. So it's good. It's all good. It's just that, you know, when there's full lists out there and stuff, and the ones that we can share those with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Our next question is for Karlos. I want to learn more about food foraging. Can you recommend some books of the local, that is Southwest Four Corners area, that offer some good info?
That is an interesting question. And the reason I say that is because much like the violence that academia, that Indigenous people have to weave in and out of in order to enter the academic circle, it's much the same way when it comes to foraging books. You'll come across a lot of the Indigenous people almost harvested biscuit root to extinction. Like settler colonial state had sentries in every 10 feet of the Rocky Mountains to know that that was the case, right? Like it's one of the most abundant things that's in the mountains here. It's endless, you know, and you come across things like that endlessly. So my main advice would be to get with somebody that gathers. Try to throw away the word foraging. Foraging is like in the academic medium has really come to turn, like we had to like forage for scraps to exist, when really we just gathered food out of systems that we created that were endless. So it's something that we're kind of like trying to move away from in that thing. And I don't really use books. I use teachers. So, but I do have some. Feel free to reach out. I'll take a picture of my bookcase that has foraging books on it downstairs and share it with you.
Excellent. Thank you, Carlos. Next question. Thank you, Carlos and Rachel, for sharing your time and expertise. You spoke beautifully about your plant relatives and their cosmologies and being woven into their system, and about Indigenous food forests being cultivated and planted. How do you see your collaboration, maybe historically, but also as you forage and replant, with forest and tree processes, communication amongst themselves, interrelationships they are nurturing with one another?
Well, I'm going to jump back to the question before last about Indigenous producers, because I'm seeing that Andy Murphy from Toasted Sister is with us. Andy has a Indigenous foods guide on her website, I believe, for Indigenous producers as well. I'm pretty sure the I Collective, I think we have one. I know it was being worked on. But to this question, I think about my son. My son and I were out walking the other day out here on the farm, and he was talking about all these things we've put in the ground and all the bushes and the trees and all this stuff. And he's 15. This is my youngest son. He's like, Dad, this stuff's not even gonna, you're not even gonna be able to eat fruit from it. You're not gonna be able to do it. I said, well, I'm not building it for me, so I'm not worried about that, right? So, you know, those relationships are being built for the future. I'm like, if I don't get to partake in them, that's fine. I think that's just part of the Indigenous being, is the spatial existence versus the linear Western thought and path. So that's my idea on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that like everything that we do it for the future, for the next 7 generations or even further. And I just want to touch on like the maple for my people. Like I found a record recently because again, so much land loss, and you know that the last maple on the reservation was chopped down in the 1800s or something like that. We have a couple maple trees at the museum. But again, this is why we as Mohegans aren't really like, we don't have, like, it's sad, all in Connecticut, there are maple festivals and they're not natives throwing these festivals. I was asked to come as like a native representative to the one at Yale last year, I think it was last year, and talk about maple. And it was a great experience because there were so many students from, especially international students, who had no clue that this had a native origin at all. You know, they just had not a clue. And again, it wasn't us throwing the festival. So it's like, we need to plant the trees. They might take time to grow. You know, like Karlos is saying, it isn't necessarily going to be for me, but these things have to keep going. They have to, it's in order for there to be a better future.
So very true. Next question is for you, Rachel. Do you have a cookbook? I would so purchase one.
Thanks. Not yet. You know, it's something I have thought about. I have a lot of things that I do so many things. You know, I used to work doing more as a personal chef, and now I do more with working at the museum and then doing public lectures and demos and things like that. And I also have a small healing business where I actually do Reiki and aromatherapy. So I've kind of got a lot going on and the limited time for writing, which is unfortunate. And so the writing has taken a backseat even during this pandemic. And I have my master's thesis, for instance, is on traditional stories of my people and how they reinforce sovereignty. They're stories about giants and little people, which are extremely important to us. And even that has to be published at some point. It's one of those things that's just sitting and needs a revamp. So I have the food paper, which is not a book. So I sent the link to the chat. Now, are we only accessing a few people out of the chat? It looks like only 5 people.
So there's a chat and there's a Q&A. And the
Okay.
chat's been going on, and the Q&A, I've just been reading question after question off the Q&A.
Okay, so my website, I just responded to one on the chat about it too, is www.rachelsayet.com, and you can find under my writings, my food paper, Celebration of Land and Sea, Modern Indigenous Cuisine in New England, which was published through Dawnland Voices Online, which is basically an online publication for Northeast Native writers. And there's also, just in case people are interested in it, there's a book, Dawnland Voices. I'm not in the original book. They created Dawnland 2.0 after the book was written. And that actually features my mother and my sister. My sister's a playwright. And every chapter is a different tribe of New England. So it's pretty great because, you know, again, the history here, not always told by us as Native people. My family has been doing this work for a very long time, but this is like a compilation of each chapter has an intro written by a tribe, and then some actually does have recipes, like Faith Davison, who I mentioned earlier, the elder. She was the one who wrote the food section for my tribe. So definitely check that out if people are interested. Both Dawnland Voices, the book, which is, you can look that up, I'm sure you'll find it. I think it's Native Writings of New England or whatever, and then Dawnland Voices 2.0 and then you can also find my stuff on the website too, my website.
Awesome, thank you so much. Michael, do we have time to take a couple more questions, or do we have to shut down? Right on. Okay, next question. Thank you very much to the panelists for sharing your knowledge this evening. This question is for both Karlos and Rachel. I'm curious to know about the social dynamics of Indigenous kitchens. Can you elaborate on the ways in which kitchens, especially professional kitchens, are organized in terms of hierarchy, space, and social relations? How and to what extent does sovereignty extend to the sociability of the kitchen space? As we know, the French brigade system is the primary and patriarchal structure for professional Western kitchens in the US. Is Indigenous food sovereignty being delinked from Western notions of the kitchen?
I'll give it to Karlos.
Great question.
one that I speak on often. I mean, there's, as I'll explain my own personal journey real fast. There's like an understanding of where I'm coming from. So I used to exist in like the bougiest of the chef world, right? I was the executive chef at a Relais and Chateau, the only gold Relais and Chateau in the state. Number 3 food rating by Bon Appetit for years. And that's what my existence used to be, right? Like I had to provide like worldly cuisine, but I got to really introduce a lot of clientele to indigenous foods at the same time. And I used to think that's what I wanted. And when I left that space, it's been 5 or 6 years now, to really focus on our traditional foodways, more so. What happened was that I came to the realization of exactly what's being asked here is, the French Brigade system is based on heteropatriarchal, top-down, male supremacist. I'm the leader. Everything has the chef's name on it. Everything is sourced in the modern times. That means sourced from anywhere in the world, right? Nobody even has to know their farmer. Nobody has to do anything to be a chef. You can be a cookie cutter chef in this industry. You don't have to know anything about your food or anything, and you can still be considered a chef. But what I come to realize is that it's the exact opposite of everything that's indigenous, right? I say that the mountains and the desert are my pantry, my refrigerator, my kitchen, my teacher, and they dictate to me. I don't ever get to dictate to them, right? And then by that I mean there's that concept of like there's in the indigenous food sovereignty movement, there's a really heavy intertribal food, like a pan-Indian, pan-indigenous foodways kind of thing, which operates in that fashion, right? It operates within the capitalist structure, within the heteropatriarchal system of chefdom. And for myself and quite a few others, it's not that, right? It's the opposite of, because the foodways that are written into our cosmologies and our relationships with these things are what give birth to our food and our foodways and what we're able to do. So this year, say yucca fruit, acorn, the pinon up here in the high country, none of that produced this year. Whereas last year was pretty epic, right? And so every season and every micro season of everything is what enables me to do something. Like I can never say next year at this time I'm going to do this food, because there's a good chance that food won't exist, right? So it's a very the indigenous food sovereignty movement and the kitchen world in particular is very divided, I guess you would say, and maybe there's a place for all of it. Maybe, I don't know, but I mean, I think that most importantly is to know that not everybody's trying to decolonize, right? Like some people are just trying to get by, and some people are just using the current structure to get ahead. So there's a lot of nuance in that conversation.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's so you said so much good stuff now. I'm trying to remember where I was what tidbit. But yeah, I think that like I was going to just talk about the fry bread quick very thing. Yeah, so we have a food like in a lot of indigenous communities that came out of the reservation system called fry bread that many of you may know, maybe many of the people here may not, depending on the audience. So that is like a very divided food in a way now, where there's the chefs trying to work like towards like what Karlos is saying, like towards pre-colonial and like traditional, and also like what I was saying about the health of our people. But fry bread was created when when a lot of tribes, not necessarily just mine, but like throughout the country, they were put on reservations, they were given lard and flour, and so this food became this fried, unhealthy food became a staple amongst hundreds of tribes throughout the country. And it shouldn't be something that's eaten daily, but it was sustenance for so long that it's become a huge part of many Native people's lives. So it's hard for them to really step away from it because of the low cost, because of the identity that it has become part of the identity because it was a food that they've been eating for so long. So there's become a huge divide amongst a lot of chefs with that specific food. I just wanted to mention because it's had all these detrimental health hazards, but it also tastes good and people like to eat it. So I say everything in moderation, eat it once a year in a powwow if you can, but it's not something you should really be eating daily if you can avoid it.
Yeah, I've had fry bread from Native friends in New Mexico and from my father-in-law in Oklahoma. It certainly is widespread. We have another question, someone wondering who is the author of Native New England Cooking?
Yeah, so that's what I was saying before. So Dale, so maybe I didn't mention her name. I thought I did, but I was trying to breeze through as fast. So her name is Dale Carson, who I was mentioning was one of my mentors. She really was the person who inspired me to write that original paper on Indigenous foods, and she connected me with Sherry Pocknett, who's Mashpee Wampanoag chef. So just to touch on that too, I know the question earlier about the Native shops in New England. That I don't, there might be at Passamaquoddy. I mean, it's very far from me. We're talking, up in Maine, but they probably have a shop for their maple stuff, I would assume. But where I am in Southern New England, Sherry Pocknett, this Mashpee Wampanoag chef who's been doing this her whole life, she actually opened for now just a food truck because of the way things have kind of evolved with this pandemic. She owns an entire restaurant down the road from me, about 15 minutes. I'm very lucky. And yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. She does some more fusion, but a lot of traditional. Like her concept of fusion is like a thing that's a Three Sisters rice, where she uses wild rice, adds a little bit of regular rice, and then has corned beans and squash. And then other things that she does that are like super traditional, like fresh smoked salmon, fresh smoked mussels, fresh smoked bluefin, bluefish, all these types of things. So if anyone here, I know I shared the link, so some people here may be from my region, highly recommend you go check out Sherry's food truck. It's called Sly Fox Den, and it's in Preston, Connecticut. And so yeah, that's the place to go around here. Honestly, throughout New England, I mean, people are driving down because she's been doing this since she was 12 years old. I think she's 60 now. Her dad, her uncle was Earl Mills, who ran a Native restaurant on the Cape. Again, way before, a lot of this reemergence, like her family was really, they were doing this Native food restaurant thing. And I never got to go to his restaurant. I think it closed in like the 80s, just around when I was born. So, but it's just an amazing thing. Earl Mills also has a book called the Cape Cod Wampanoag Cookbook. So that's another one that has a New England cookbook. Dale Carson has the one I showed you, Native New England cooking, which some of that is traditional, but a lot of it is also kind of Thanksgiving-y recipes, because again, the time she was writing was like the 80s. Her other book I find to be a little bit more traditional and also cobbles together more from different tribes, new Native American cooking. It's kind of confusing because that one has the new in it. You'd think it'd be less traditional, but it actually has more, just more recipes from all around the area. So those are two great cookbooks by Dale Carson. She also has a book on dream catchers. So yeah, you can look into her work. And you know what's funny though about Dale is that she's not reprinting that book, that Native New England cooking. So anyone who you know, starts searching for it, and you know, if they want to, you know, if people, I don't know if people are able to directly reach out to us or how you have it set up, Sarah, but I'm pushing for that to be reprinted. And as her daughter posted, oh, this is the last copy of the book. Her mom, Dale, like I said, is an elder, but also like, I think early stage Alzheimer's, like she's definitely, you know, not well. So when I heard her say that, I said, well, you know, there's a lot of Indigenous chefs that I know and work with that, you know, would be interested in this book. So I really don't, you know, I hope that there's a way we can get another edition going. So whether it's something that, you know, enough people ask her, you know, maybe we can do that. So it's just, you know, good to know in case they can't find it, then maybe reach out to me and we'll try to find out a way to get more copies.
That sounds great. I don't think we set up anything, did we, Michael, for people to contact our presenters directly?
I was just about to ask, actually, as we're wrapping up, if Karlos and Rachel could both give people a way to contact them beyond tonight, especially because there's so many questions we didn't get to tonight, and so many people looking for recommendations or other ways to follow up on things that you've talked about tonight. What is the best way to get a hold of both of you?
For me, it's my website, www.rachelsayet.com. You can connect with me directly there. You can put in a, like it will directly go to my email.
Great, thank you.
I just threw my email there in the webinar chat.
Okay, perfect. There you go. So there in the chat, you've got Karlos's email too. For those of you who weren't we weren't able to get to your questions tonight. I think it's time to thank our guests so much. Thank you to Karlos and to Rachel for sharing so much with us tonight. I'm so grateful for what you added to our forest programming this semester. Thank you to Sarah and Vicky for representing Texas Tech here on this side of things. I'm very grateful to have both of you here tonight. A couple of notes, please go ahead and register for next week's event, Lee Klinger's lecture, which will be our final forest event of the semester. And as always, I'd like to thank the Humanities Center staff, Justin Hughes, Tara Okopi, and Callie Watson, who support everything that we do in so many ways. The video archive of this will be up on our website. If not by tomorrow, then by Monday, we will have a link to this archived video of all of this presentation, and that will be available if you go to the events tab on the Humanities Center website. But once again, thank you so much for such a great evening and for such great conversation and such great presentations. I'm very grateful on behalf of the Humanities Center.
Yes, thanks to everybody. Thank you, Karlos. Thank you, Rachel. This was fantastic.
All right.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you,
us.
and have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.